You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so here we go. So five, four, three, two, one. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have back as my guest, Alisa Zipursky. Alisa, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be back with you.
You are welcome. So Alisa is a storyteller, a writer, a facilitator, and childhood sexual abuse survivor. Her work focuses on offering emotional support to other young survivors healing from sexual trauma. Alisa started Healing Honestly in 2016 as a way to share her experiences as a millennial woman trying to live her career building, tequila drinking, sex having, Netflix and chilling life while contending with her experiences as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. HealingHonestly.com now has a readership of 273,000 people who stick around for her transparency, her humor. Healing from child sexual abuse is funnier than you'd think, she says. An ability to talk about really heavy and hard topics around sexual trauma, mental health, and healing in a way that feels accessible. Her new book, Healing Honestly, The Messy and Magnificent Path to Overcome Self-Blame and Self-Shame, will be out tomorrow. Alisa, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
So before we get going, as people, maybe some didn't hear the first episode when you were on previously, but share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I am born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I am here in Washington, D.C.
Okay. All right. So I want to get to talking about the book, obviously, but let's share with our listeners, give us a little rundown about how all this started for you.
So I started doing this work in 2015, 2016. I was coming out, I was in my late 20s and coming out of a period in my life that involved my dormant childhood sexual abuse trauma coming to the surface and sort of wreaking havoc on every aspect of my life and impacting my ability to have a job, my relationships with my family, my relationships to myself. And through that healing experience, I just wanted a place on the internet that felt like a place where we could both sort of hold two truths. One, that our trauma impacts every aspect of our lives, and also that we are capable and worthy of full and vibrant lives. And I just felt like at the time, there were sort of I kept stumbling upon two options for resources. One were clinical-based resources written by doctors and medical experts that felt deeply pathologizing for me and made me sort of feel
Mm-hmm.
like a lab rat being studied. Or there was a lot of memoir that is a beautiful and important art form, but for me felt really re-traumatizing. And reading about people's very specific experiences of abuse wasn't what I needed for my healing at the time. I
Mm-hmm.
needed a place where we didn't focus on what happened, but we focused on the what now. And so I just started putting my work out on the internet through my website, healinghonestly.com, and it really blew up. I'm proud to say now we have 500,000 readers, which is really incredible. Um,
Wow. Let me change that. I'll
so I
change
gave
that.
you I gave you old numbers. I redid
Jesus.
the numbers recently and I was like, holy smokes, which is really amazing and has really grown. And I spend a lot of time doing public speaking and workshops and talking on college campuses and at conferences all about the realities of healing from childhood sexual abuse. And then a couple of years ago, I was approached by a woman named Charlotte Ashlock from Barrett Kohler Publishers, who I didn't know then, but would become my most beloved editor. And she approached me about writing a book. She had found my work because she was personally looking for support because she herself is a survivor of abuse. And she reached out to me and things really grew from there. And she really helped me cultivate what would a book from me look like?
Mm-hmm.
What's out there? And what would it mean for a book to be truly a survivor to survivor resource for healing?
Mm-hmm. Now, and that's a perfect segue into talking about your book. But before we get there, um, and I'm asking you this because you have a very, uh, what, open way of talking about this, maybe even a unique way, a very empowering way of approaching this whole topic of healing. When things first started happening for you, when you started saying, "Holy crap, something's going on here," how did you deal with that?
I found it extraordinarily overwhelming, and I think that, um, like a lot of survivors, my sort of come to Jesus moments about what had happened to me was both very slow and all at once. And I had been in therapy all my life, but wasn't really and I would visit parts of my abuse at different times in my life. And that sort of experience was very nonlinear. And I say that because, I have now supported so many survivors in their healing journey. And sometimes it's something that we've always been aware of that happened to us. And sometimes I talk with survivors who are in their 60s or 70s who might have experienced a different trauma or something else has happened in their life that has triggered them.
Mhm.
And they've been like, holy shit, this was actually well, I've been holding this my whole life sort of unknowingly or unconsciously. And so for me, I had a therapist and I've had a bunch of therapists in my life who have been really, really supportive and wonderful and allowed me to sort of come to my own terms and realization of my abuse in my own time and allow for me to really direct myself when my brain was sort of ready to process what had happened to me. And the other part of it, which is absolutely critical and was totally the inspiration for me starting this work, was my very dear best friend, Kate Vandertag. She and I met our first day of college, and I saw her and I was like, this is the coolest girl I've ever seen in my entire life. Her ringtone was Khalees's Bossy, and I was like, I need to be this woman's friend. And she says she felt the same way about me. Anyway, she, even in high school, had been volunteering at her local rape crisis center all through college, was advocating for survivors on campus, doing trainings about sexual assault prevention. After college, she has spent her entire career in the anti-violence space. So when I was coming to terms with my own abuse, my best friend was actually primed to be like a professional best friend to me.
Well,
And all these years later, she'll say, like, it's not the same thing. Like being, as you know, as a therapist, like being trained to support somebody in a professional context versus when it's like one of the people you love the most are not
mhm,
are not
mhm.
one-to-one things. But she was my lifeline. And she taught me things like that. It was okay that I didn't remember my abuse clearly, that it was
Wow.
actually totally normal to feel blame for what happened to me and to feel guilt over things that weren't my fault. Um, she normalized all of these things that otherwise would have kept me in silence and kept me away from receiving like resources and going after like healing support for myself. And she was really she stood beside me in the darkest moments of my life and made sure I never felt alone. And I recognize that a lot of people don't have access to somebody who's quite that trauma informed, especially like in their early 20s.
Right, right. So was she a
And
survivor?
she was not. She's just been a forever advocate
Wow.
and an extraordinary advocate. And really starting healing honestly was like, how do I replicate what she has given me to other
Mhm,
people who might not have a bestie who like can tell you, it's okay, like these things are normal, you're not fucking crazy.
mhm.
And she's remained sort of like a guiding light for me about like why I do what I do.
Well, one of the things, so we're talking about the book here called Healing Honestly, The Messy and Magnificent Path to Overcoming Self-Blame and Self-Shame. That'll be out tomorrow again. And we'll have links for this on the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. One of the things that struck me and strike me about you is you throughout the book there and within you there's this whole tone of acceptance and allowance, um, that feels very empowering for me and that feels very important. Talk a little bit about that.
For me, I think that. in my own experiences and in my experiences of supporting so many other survivors in their healing journey, um, we are conditioned by the people around us and the world that we live in to believe that what we have gone through and the ways that we have survived and the ways that we have figured out how to heal and cope are things we should feel blame and shame over. And it's like damned if we do, damned if we don't. Survivors are set up to both feel blame about what happened to us and then feel shame over all the ways we've figured out how to live
Mm-hmm.
despite this happening to us. And I just think that it's so important, it's so critical to me that even though everybody's healing journey is different and what I need in my healing might be radically different than somebody else, we all have to live in this world steeped in rape culture that judges and shames us for what we've been through and how we endure. And we all like the kindest thing, I think, and the most important thing we can do as survivors in community with each other is to call bullshit on that and to say, like, actually, each of us, like, are the experts in our own safety, do know what we
Mm-hmm.
need, can go at our own pace, whatever that means for us. And that there isn't this right way to survive. There isn't this one right way to heal. And you don't have to go like on a yoga retreat and start drinking green juices and like appropriating Eastern culture in order to like heal, like
Mm-hmm.
this isn't some cute thing that happens on Instagram, it's your fucking life. And and you're allowed to live it however you see is right and best for you. And so to me, my theory is not, while this book offers lots of practical guidance, like the key takeaway, one of the key takeaways I want for people is just to like realize that the judgment that is imposed upon us is like utter bullshit and that we actually have a lot of the answers ourselves. We've just been conditioned by everyone around us to not be allowed to trust it.
Mm-hmm. So when you say, and I love that, right? It's so easy to feel that there's a specific way to heal. I mean, God forbid you look at Instagram and everyone's, you know, off in some retreat somewhere. It's everything's beautiful, and you're like, I can't do that. But when you when you talk to people, what are they coming up against? What
Mm.
because again, you have a certain confidence in going through this. Was that always there for you?
No, I don't think so. I think what has guided me, it's so funny. I started this website in 2016. I didn't realize I was my own audience. And that's really funny to me because it's like a fucking course I was my own audience. But, something that I allowed to guide me is just to go back to my 20s and think about what I needed to hear and offer that to people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think what has come with time, and seeing so many people like respond really, really enthusiastically to what I put out in the world is like, oh, not everybody has to fuck with me and fuck with the way that I think about this stuff. Like, you don't have to be for everybody. You just have to be for the people who would most benefit from what you offer to the world, And so I think like getting feedback from people of being like, I actually really love that you put dumb gifs in your Friday newsletter every week and that you always send like a stupid TikTok of a dog. Like I look forward to it every Friday. To the people being like, I like that you make these jokes. Like it makes things feel much more approachable. I don't feel so like I'm holding my breath in anticipation of
Mm-hmm.
triggers. So I think my audience, my readership has really affirmed for me that like both whenever I have a hesitation of like maybe I'll say this thing and maybe it'll be isolating, that then they respond immediately being like, "Oh my god, same." So that has been encouraging, but also that like my sort of style and my approach for the people it's right for, it's right for them. And that
Mm-hmm.
has I think given me a lot of confidence to approach healing with sort of my brand of like compassion and humor and at times levity and real talk.
When you say, you know, people, we have the answers, we are the experts. Um, Specifically, what do you mean when you say that?
What I mean is that I think that, especially for those of us who experience childhood sexual abuse, that as I did and as I center in my work, while my work in my book is for anybody who has experienced abuse or sexual trauma, I really do center CSA. And with that, we often, as children, have a keen understanding, either consciously or not consciously, that something isn't right. And that we have an intuition in our minds and in our bodies that something isn't okay. And we may have communicated that, not maybe explicitly, maybe not explicitly, and have received a lifetime of information from the people who were most important to us, who we were conditioned to understand loved us the most and were there to protect us, and whose opinion was most important, that our intuition that something wrong was happening was not correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it might have been, indicating to a parent that what happened to us wasn't safe or that we don't want to be near somebody or that we're having an emotional reaction and they're minimizing it or invalidating it or perhaps just gaslighting us and telling us, the sky is a different color when it isn't. And with that, we then say, okay, so I guess everything that my mind and body is telling me that isn't okay is actually okay. And now I can't trust what my mind and body tell me anymore.
Right.
And it goes even further. It goes from that to, okay, well, these bad feelings I feel in my mind and my body must be my fault because all these adults are telling me, like, this isn't it. This isn't
Mm-hmm.
real, or this doesn't matter, or this doesn't count, or you're not understanding your own reality. So then the only answer, especially as a child, is to turn inward and say, I'm the problem. And so I think it's so critical when we're healing, and I think it's certainly one of the hardest parts, and it's non-linear, and there's no endpoint. I haven't if there is, I haven't reached it, um, of being able to say like, "Oh, actually, that intuition I had in my body, in my mind was actually correct. The adults
Mm-hmm.
around me were incorrect." And I get to make decisions now as an adult based on those things. And that is like really radical for a lot of us because we
Right.
were completely conditioned to not trust ourselves at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, as I said, like healing is so different for everybody. But in order for us to know what we need in our own healing journeys, we have to find ways to reconnect with that and give ourselves, the opportunity to trust ourselves. And so that's why the book is full of information and it's full of stories and it's full of even
Mm-hmm.
some laughs and all that. But it's also, I want the reading of the book to, in and of itself, be a practice in that. In it, as you'll say, I'll be like, you don't have to go read the next chapter right now. Do you want to go take a break? Do you want to go get some nosh? Do you want to take a nap? Do you want a margarita? Like, you don't have to keep going right now. You don't get a prize for going to the finish line. What do you want to do right now?
Right, right, right. I appreciated that in your book. There's a very pronounced and wonderful, kind of amazing thread of humor and almost irreverence. And I think you do a really great task in balancing this crazy topic, heavy topic of trauma with some humor. How did that come about for you? Because
It's like my
it's kind of like a tightrope walk,
It
right?
is. And I have received negative feedback in the past about it, I'll be honest with you. There is, and I don't mean to generalize that, but I can only tell you from the feedback I've received, it's consistently people of an older demographic, I think like 60 plus, who have written me. There's not a ton, but there have been some that they find that the humor that I use, um contributes to survivors not being taken seriously.
Mm.
And I understand that where they're coming from is a place of hurt and pain, living in a world steeped in rape culture that tells us that the reason survivors don't get the validation and basic humanity that they deserve is because of the way survivors are presenting themselves. This mythic idea that there is some perfect survivor out there, and if we just present ourselves in a particular way
Mhm.
with this respectability politics, and we don't curse, and we don't have sex, and we have sex, but not too much sex, but we don't seem too interested in sex, and we talk about our trauma, but we don't talk about our trauma, but we leave the past in the past, but just enough, and we have the right amount of evidence, but we don't harp on that evidence, but it's irrefutable evidence, and that kind of evidence doesn't exist, and this wild criteria of a completely impossible standard of the perfect victim, then survivors will be taken seriously. That's all it's taken.
Right.
Just, since the existence of humanity, it's just that each of us have been slightly flawed. Like, who'd have thunk it?
Mhm.
No. And um and so I see that coming from a place of hurt that they have not been taken seriously. And I hear that because that is a problem, collectively in all across the world. Um, but I think it's extraordinarily misguided to direct that at me. Um, I don't think that it's fair for us to police the way we cope and heal.
Right.
And it's okay that some people talk about their trauma in ways that I never would. And that's okay too. Like there's something for everyone. But I think for me also, it's so wild because I'm like, I'm a Jew. Like my people proudly have made it quite well known that we use humor to cope with extraordinary suffering and trauma.
Mhm.
And I am incredibly proud of that tradition. And so to tell me that I have to go against my nature, to go against my ancestry, to go against what is in my bones about how I know how to cope with extraordinary trauma, to go against that because I want somebody to take me seriously who has no interest in taking me seriously feels fundamentally misguided for me, and
Yeah.
not relevant in my life. And so, my family are the funniest people I know. Like sitting around my grandparents' table, a dinner table in Omaha, Nebraska, which was sort of the heart of where our family was. Like I remember my aunts and uncles, they would cry laughing. There were always needed to be a box of tissues because they would laugh so hard they would cry. They're incredible storytellers. They're so fucking funny. And so me using humor, yes, it's a tightrope and it's intentional. And I try very thoughtfully to balance tone and to make things feel more approachable and accessible when otherwise they feel really stigmatizing and scary. But also, it's me giving myself permission to say, I get to show up as my whole self when I do this work. And I don't
Mhm.
have to play some role of like this, the victim, the survivor who goes to the thriver, and now she's like blah blah blah, and she speaks in platitudes and is an inspiration. It's like, no, I just get to be a human. And that's what sustains me through this work.
I think that also comes through in the book. I mean, just the very use of humor, uh, I think, lays out a kind of welcome mat for people to be themselves, to understand that it's okay for them to be themselves, and that's a kind of a crucial part in the healing process. Taking a step back, what did you, and we kind of, I think, covered this, but I want to give you the opportunity to articulate it even more. So, what did you want to the book to be a statement about?
Mm. Well, first and foremost, I wanted the book to feel like a friend and to feel like the friend that I had that said, "Hey, I've been down this road. I'm here with you. You're not alone in this." And Like, I'm going to also introduce you to some other amazing friends that have helped me along my way, and you can hear from them and you can learn from their wisdom and their experience too. I wanted this book to feel like community. And somebody who read an early copy of my book said the most wonderful thing. They said, "This feels like the support group I always dreamed of and never had." And I want people, whether they feel like they want to disclose what happened to them to somebody or not, in the privacy of themselves, to feel the healing aspect of being in community with other survivors
Mm.
and feeling supported in a way that is full of boundaries, in a way that is full of consent, in a way that is full of content warnings, like, and get all the benefits of a support group without actually having to um, physically put themselves in a situation that they may not want to put themselves in for any good reason. So more important to me than even what it said was how it made people feel. I wanted people to feel that kind of friendship, and I wanted people to feel like it's actually okay for us to talk about our trauma in the same language and the same way we talk about any other aspect of our lives. Because so often we feel so fragmented and
Hmm.
compartmentalized. And it's actually okay to like be our whole selves as we're healing and talking about this. And then, really what I want people to walk away with this is an understanding for themselves as to why we feel so much blame and shame for things that aren't our fault. In each chapter, we go through, who are the people in our lives who we trusted, who reinforced these untrue stories that we're to blame for what we've been through and how we heal. What are the institutions and the cultural norms that have led to this and contributed to this? And what are some practical strategies for us to turn the volume down on that shame and blame that we hear to no fault of our own, so that each of us can get in touch with that inner expert and hear that voice inside of us louder? And with that, we'll be able to actually know what we want.
Hmm.
And not necessarily what we want in the big grand scheme of life, but what we want in terms of like, oh, this thing is really triggering for me. Maybe I'm not going to feel shame that I have this trigger, and I'm not going to blame myself for having this reaction. And instead, I'm going to be compassionate with myself and say, you know what? It's okay if I want to avoid this thing that's triggering right now. Doesn't mean I'll always feel that way, but the fact that I feel that way today is enough, and I don't need to feel bad about that.
Right, right. Well, before we started recording, you mentioned that there were some challenges in actually writing the book.
Many, many. So there were sort of personal challenges and then there were structural challenges. The personal challenge is that in order to know what I needed to say, the way I knew what I wanted this book to be was to go back to some of the worst times in my life and think, what was the book that really would have helped me out at this time? And as I proudly say on the cover of the book, the least re-traumatizing read on child sex abuse out there. Um, it was very triggering for me to write.
Hmm.
And I kept waiting for it to get easier. I thought, oh, well, maybe this is just a difficult chapter for me, or maybe this is just a difficult month for me. And about halfway through, I remember going to my agent and my editor, who are both survivors, and saying, I don't think the easier time is coming. I think this is what it is. And so I had to learn how to take a lot of breaks. I had to learn to step away for whole weeks at a time. I had to radically um, care for myself in a way that was sort of a new level. And everyone around me really rallied with me. My support system was so extraordinary and carried me so much through this. Every strategy and coping mechanism I had ever had just kept, more and more and more to get through this. And it was during a pandemic, which, helps everything and makes everything so much easier. I know it was, I've only written one book and lived through one pandemic, but I'm pretty safe to say I wouldn't recommend doing them at the same time. Um, and then there was the structural challenges, which are really pronounced. As I said, my agent and my editor are both survivors, and we all come to this work with extraordinary personal investment as well as professional investment. And we just worked as hard as we could to try to create a new way of working that was trauma informed, whether it was advocating for more time for me so I could take more breaks, or advocating for me to have legal protections against abusers who might take legal action around me. Um, there is just so much in the publishing world, um, just like the rest of society, that is really not set up to be
Mm,
trauma informed in the slightest, and certainly not set up to support survivors and their safety needs. And so I'm extraordinarily proud of this book. I'm perhaps even more proud of the way that we did it together as a team. This book just kept finding survivors sort of at every single step who stepped in and advocated, like, in extraordinary ways for it, and that's why it's here today.
well, speaking with Alisa Zipursky, the book again is called Healing Honestly: The Messy and Magnificent Path to Overcoming Self Blame and Self Shame. It's out tomorrow. Um, so people are going to read this book and they are going to feel that embrace that you present to them and give them and welcome them with. Um, how else do you help people? I mean, aside from
Mm.
aside from all the stuff you do, I mean, do you have? You said you work with people in what context?
Yeah, so a lot of my work lately has been doing a lot of public speaking. I love especially visiting college campuses and speaking with folks on campus, whether it's survivors or the people who love them or students just trying to learn about. We spend a lot of time sort of debunking the myths about being a sexual violence survivor. And I love it also because I don't know if anybody has experienced a college student complimenting their outfit, but it's the best feeling in the world. And that's my drug of choice. So I like going on the college campuses wearing cool clothes and then them telling me that. It's like my Tinkerbell moment. Anyway, so doing that and at conferences as well, and sort of bringing this work out into the world in that way. And then I do also keep up with my readership every Friday. I put out a newsletter that is equal parts stuff about trauma and stuff about life. Like every week, I include a TV recommendation that includes content warnings for sexual violence because guess what? Survivors want to watch Netflix and chill too, but sometimes we need some info. Or,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, like a dumb photo of my dog. And I've received emails from survivors being like, you know what? I don't even read the first half of the newsletter where you talk about real stuff. I just go to the fun stuff. And I
That's
say, you
funny.
know what? That's great because that's the whole fucking point. Like,
All right.
did it give you some joy today? Like, that's healing too. And then I also offer some on demand as well as in person, well, virtual in person coaching, specifically like for childhood sexual abuse survivors. But right now, it's really about doing whatever I can to help get this book out into the world, and get it into the hands of the people who most need it. Survivors and the people who love us, and the people who treat us, and the people who
Mm,
care about us. The last time there was a book, a survivor to survivor book about healing from childhood sexual abuse, was The Courage to Heal, and that was written in 1988. And I can tell you right now that was 35 years ago because it was the year I was born. And so it's really important that we get the word out about this book because there are millions of us out there, and we deserve so many resources, and we deserve to hear from each other, and have that survivor to survivor community and love as well.
as we kind of wind down here, I want to hear what your thoughts are on the cultural shift that's happened within the recognition of trauma. I mean, a lot, with the Me Too movement, lots happened. Where do you see things going? I mean,
Mm.
how do you interpret this wider recognition of trauma?
I interpret it carefully, I think is the answer. On any given day, I feel radically different about how optimistic I do and don't feel about things. Um, I have so much tremendous love and respect and admiration for Tarana Burke and the Me Too movement that she has built. Um, Also, I know survivors have been screaming at the top of their lungs about what has happened to them and what they need since the dawn of time. And so to me, I think that I will be continue to be heartened to see people who aren't survivors speaking up, who creating change, actually challenging systems of oppression. Because survivors, we've been out here. We've been doing this work. We started it before Me Too. We started it before the last 100 years. We have been here talking about this.
Mhm.
And it's really going to take everyone else, especially people in positions of power, to actually shift power dynamics. And, something I'm extraordinarily mindful of in this exact moment in particular is that transphobia is a leading indicator of cause for childhood sexual abuse. We know from the American Academy of Pediatrics, a 2012 study that showed that children who were gender nonconforming were 7 times more likely to be sexually abused than their gender conforming peers. So we know that transphobia and homophobia are leading causes of CSA. And I'm quite concerned with the rising um, fascist laws that are being passed throughout this country that are oppressing gender nonconforming, trans, and queer children. It is absolutely putting them at much greater risk for sexual violence and all sorts of kinds of violence. And so, and I really applaud organizations like Mirror Memoirs, led by Amitha Swadine and Jaden Fields, who have really been uplifting this and talking
Mhm.
about this and saying, hey, if you care about childhood sexual abuse, if you care about ending sexual violence, if you care about protecting children from sexual violence, you have to care about transphobia and homophobia, and you have to care about what these kids are going through, and protect and revere these children no matter who they are. And so I think it's a call to action for all of us, especially those of us like myself who is cis and heterosexual, that if we really want to see the tides turning on the epidemic of sexual violence in this country, we have to be bringing that into it.
Yeah, appreciate that. All right, Alisa. I mean, I could talk to you for a long time here. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
You can reach me through my website, healinghonestly.com. You can also hit me up on Instagram at Alisa Healing Honestly. That's ALISA Healing Honestly on Instagram. And most of all, you can go get your own copy of Healing Honestly, the messy and magnificent path to overcoming self-blame and self-shame. As I proudly say, the least re-traumatizing read on CSA, written by a survivor for survivors.
Awesome. Again, we'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Alisa, thank you so much. You are not just a breath of fresh air, you're an amazing wind. You're a storm of amazingness. Seriously, you're so friggin' inspiring. You are.
Thank you. And thank you for being such an incredible supporter of my work all these years.
I appreciate that. All right, we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.